Oh, you hit an error. That's the first time that's ever happened.
Says we're rolling.
All right. Well, on my screen it says we're not. So if we are live, let's go. Welcome to the Wednesday live Q&A with Oak and Rock Fatherhood. I am your host, Zachary Small, joined by Anthony Migliorino. And today we have a special guest, Joe Horton. I came across Joe from his popular podcast, Guild of Dads. Since then, I have found his private Facebook group, the Guild of Dads group. And now he's been crushing it on Twitter Spaces. The man is all over the place. Joe, welcome to the Oak and Rock Fatherhood live Q&A. It's Wednesday night for us, but it's 1 o'clock in the morning on Thursday for you. So I appreciate you making the time to show up for us and to spread the good word. How you doing?
Not bad, not bad. I appreciate you inviting me on here. I'm okay though. I've had a couple of hours sleep before I've come on here. So, sleep is important for dads, very important. So I've had a couple of hours sleep before, and then after I come off this, I'm going to have another few hours sleep before the sun rises here in the Eastern Hemisphere. So, but I'm good. I'm looking forward to this evening stroke this morning's conversation with you guys.
It'll be a good one. So we were talking about the topic and what we were going to do and roll with. And Anthony and I agreed, you dropped a quote recently that was extremely powerful, and it's just a one sentence. But when you really break it down to its constituent, components, it really lays out a lot of the issues we see in a lot of the men we're working with and a lot of the families that we're working with. So the quote, I've got it up here on the screen. The greatest burden for a child to bear is the unlived life of their parent. Let's just dive right into it, Joe. Where did you come across this and how did you formulate this and what did you mean by it?
So this quote I came across because my fascination with men and men's psyches and men's mental health very much comes around because of my interest in meaning. I'm heavily influenced by Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, but also because I have this interest around what happens to men during the midlife, the midpoint way of their life, what they go through, what they experience. Sometimes society dismisses it as a midlife crisis, and I think from what I can understand and from what I've learned, it actually presents a massive opportunity, particularly for dads, because it's generally dads that kind of fall into this kind of midlife area. So I've done a hell of a lot of reading around the issue of meaning, but also around this midway point of life, which has led me down a path of reading around Jungian psychology. And what Jung talks about is this notion of the shadow, which is basically a part of your psyche which can work against you. And essentially it's a lot of the kind of scars that you obtain in your life from earlier on in your life. So around childhood, in terms of how you were kind of brought up, in terms of the things that were said to you by your parents, in terms of how love was given to you. Was it a case that you were only loved when you got the grades at school, or was there conditions given in terms of getting emotional support from your parents? And so, and what happens with these things is they sit in your kind of psyche like a computer program, if you like, which is kind of out of date. So it's like kind of running a Windows 2022 PC on 1985 software. It's just not going to work, because it's going to keep you in behaviors and ways of dealing with things and ways of looking at the world that are just completely out of date. And that causes problems, because it means that you may have limiting beliefs about what you can do. You may sabotage yourself. You may sabotage yourself in relationships specifically. And it's kind of working against you. You can do something called shadow work to begin to bring this shadow into the light and begin to work your way through this kind of inner journey that men have to go through. But the problem is, and explaining this quote, the greatest burden for a child to bear is the unlived life of the parent. This impacts a lot of guys right the way through their lives. So it might start in childhood, but it is going to continue right the way through their lives, and it's going to impact decisions decades later. So a guy in their 40s, for instance, you could be say starting a new business venture, which requires you to work very hard and to push through things that you're uncomfortable with doing. Now, if you've already been always told for the whole of your life that you're a failure and that you're never going to amount to anything, that's going to stick right in your brain, and it's going to be causing you to not succeed many decades after that seed has been planted in your brain. Okay. And the problem with that is that you can end up sabotaging yourself. So you could end up, sabotaging relationships. You could end up sabotaging business opportunities. It's like this thing working against you in the background constantly, you know. And what I want to make clear on this is not a case of kind of blaming your parents for doing a crap job, because let's face it, they probably had the information that they had based on their parents, your grandparents. So this is kind of something that's kind of passed down. So it's not, you may well think on surface level, okay, I've had not a bad upbringing. My mum and dad cared for me. They put discipline in place, they had rules and whatever and stuff. That's the surface level of this. This is a lot kind of deeper. It's where if you imagine two levels to this, you've got the surface level and then you've got the level which is below. And this is what we're looking at, these things that affect us on a kind of deep down level. And, the easy way to explain it is when something keeps going wrong in your life, you're the problem, but it keeps happening. And you're like, why the fuck does this keep happening? Why do I keep sabotaging myself? And what really, so when I'm on my podcast, I interview a hell of a lot of evolutionary biologists, psychologists, pediatricians, and so I begin to form kind of patterns and hypotheses about this kind of stuff. One of the things that people that work predominantly with children tell me is that this notion of kind of pressurizing your kids and getting them to do extra tuition to succeed and keep up with the stuff that other kids are doing and other families are doing, this kind of keeping up with the Joneses kind of mentality, is damaging kids. And the statistics on it are that if you are pushing your kids to meet certain grades and do certain things, it actually works against them. Kids actually do better when you allow them to forge their own path, to make their own mistakes, but you support them in how they're going to come back from those mistakes. Because if a kid learns how to come back from mistakes and cope with the strong emotions that mistakes create when they're younger, then when they're older and they're working for a company and they're trying to close a big contract and they fail in doing so, then they're mentally equipped to do that without actually, hitting the bottle or going off the rails or, their life ending because of it. So what interests me particularly at the moment, and I was talking with Anthony about this before we came on, there's a growing conversation around peaceful parenting. And I see, so if you see shadow work as a product of what happened when you're a child and you have to deal with that in your 30s, 40s, whatever it's going to be, if you can get the peaceful parenting part of it correct at the other end of the spectrum, then you will have less men in midlife having to do shadow work to unravel some of the shit that they were dumped with when they were a child. And this doesn't have to be, in my experience, my experience was that I trained as a lawyer when I left school. And when I look back on that, my dad was always saying to me, you'd make a really good lawyer. So this is not like him forcing me down that path, but he suggested it to me. Oh, you'd make a good lawyer. And how many kids and how many men and women out there have had that? You'd make a good accountant. You'd make a good doctor, or you'd make and it doesn't need to be really explicit. I think this can be an implicit suggestion, and it can be a gentle kind of nudging of a child into a certain direction. So this is where I'm kind of looking at, and that's what that quote means, that we have to be very careful with our kids. And I see this, we were talking about this on the spaces at the weekend. I see kids, I want my kid to be a professional footballer or a soccer player, as you guys say. So you have these dads screaming on the sidelines and putting massive pressure on their kids to succeed. I've seen it when I was a kid. When I was I did a lot of cycle racing, and I had a buddy who, you know, we'd attack and we'd be in the break up the road, and his dad would be screaming at him from the side of the road. 2 minutes. You got 2 minutes. You need to get it out to a minute and a half. So start pulling through hard. And shouting at this kid, and he'd get out, he'd finish the race, and he'd get off his bike, and he'd be having arguments with his dad by the finishing line because his dad was such a tyrant at pushing him. But it could be girls with like piano recitals, or it could be any point in a kid's life where you are pushing them to do something. And with kids, you have intrinsic motivation and you have extrinsic motivation. We all have this. So extrinsic motivation is where you have motivation from outside of you to do something. With intrinsic motivation, it's motivation that's from within you to do something. We want to foster in our kids intrinsic motivation. They've got to do stuff because they want to do it, not because you told them to do it. Because if you're constantly telling them to do it, then they're going to have to unravel this stuff further down the line. So that's what that quote is about, in a very long answer, man.
No, that was necessary, because it really does paint the picture, and the chat's loving the accent, man. They're loving the fact that you're even here speaking to us. So they want you to speak the whole time. They don't need Anthony and I talking at all. But I'll say this, when you mention the shadow self, I understand the concept, but when I hear it, I think of it as half of the equation. There's two parts of it. For there to be a shadow, there has to be light. And I think for a lot of parenting, only half of the equation is focused on. You'll correct your kid all the time, but you forget you've got to praise them. You'll push them to do better and do better and do better, but you'll never take the brakes off. Pump the brakes a little, pull them back a little, and make sure they're still enjoying what it is they're doing and competing in. So there's always a push and pull. And a lot of, especially fathers, they find themselves always in the role of push. I've got to correct the kid. I'm the authority. Moms, I don't make me get dad. It's always that dad's on there, and they forget. You told your kid, train hard, eat right, make your bed, clean your room, push yourself for practice, but you didn't say, hey, I'm proud of you for doing that. Hey, how are you doing? Are you having a good time? Hey, what are you thinking about? What are your goals for next? What are things you can do for your genuine desire without me putting them out there for you? So when I hear this, I often think that component is something that we do need to focus on. And a part of peaceful parenting, something Anthony brought to my world, is that we're evolving here. And it's like everywhere else has grown and improved and evolved, except the rearing of children. We fall back to the most easy denominator. Whack it, it's quiet. Boom, problem solved. And if you were to put some effort and intentional practice into raising that kid the same way you do with yourself, well, and as Building Better Fathers said, here with this quote, we would have a lot less layers to peel back. If you teach your kid young to do it themselves, when you say, hey, I think you'd make a great lawyer, that might lead them in a direction, but it won't be as forceful, as much impactful if that's followed up with, but you can be whatever, and I'm going to support you wherever. So you could be this, but you could also be this and this and this. And if that follow on the other hand, but you tell me what do you enjoy? What do you like doing? Well, now it's not as heavy of a push, because you can tell your kid all the time, hey, you're really good at this. But if all you do is focus on that one thing and you skip all the other things about them, well, now they think that's how I get dad's love. If I do that one thing, dad really gets proud of me. And that creates the complex. But to Building Better Fathers, he says, as people age, their experiences and memories layer over the top of each other like an onion. At the core of everything, shaping everything else, are childhood experiences, joy, and trauma. When you bring it all the way back with the issues these dudes are facing, and Anthony, he's a professional at this, you get it all the way back. And the guy's, it's not my childhood. It's not my childhood. And I watched him keep talking to the guy, and he's like, oh, shit. My dad never was there for me. And I'd say, hey, man, I thought it wasn't the childhood. But you pull those layers back, and that's the core of all of us. If you can get that right, though, it can radiate. And there's just 3 layers versus 35 you've got to get through.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like the way that Building Better Fathers uses that analogy of food as well, because there is, in terms of like trauma, we've spoken about this before, Zac. You lost a parent when you were very young. I lost a parent when I was 18. Very traumatic. You don't have a handbook for life. So what happens is you inevitably develop coping strategies. they can also form part of your shadow, because these are the things when you're older, you have the retrospect to look back and say, well, actually, I probably could have dealt with it this way rather than drinking, or rather than, getting into porn, or rather than finding coping strategies. But I didn't know any different at that point. That was all that I had to use within my armory to cope with this shit. It's not until you do look back that you realize, oh, maybe I should have dealt with that a different way. And in terms of the food analogy, I was thinking about this before I came on. So for when you're a guy and you're in, I don't know, midlife or whatever, I think there is like a meaning crisis. Guys have this issue right now where they've got all of the stuff that life could give them to offer, but that they are lacking meaning in their lives. And they might have a car, they might have a nice house, they might be going on nice holidays, but the problem is life is kind of bereft of meaning. So what happens also at midlife is that you get pulled, your ego journey of like the immature masculine of the first half of your life falls away, and then you feel this pull towards something bigger. Stuff that interested you no longer interests you. The stuff that you were kind of passionate about in the first half of life, you don't want to sit in front of the TV watching Netflix every night and drinking beer. You want to, something is pulling you. But what fucks guys up is that they think, well, something's missing, so what I need to do is fill it with external stimuli and sedate it, because that's what I used to do in the first half of my life. I used to drink, I used to take drugs, I used to look at porn. So what I do is I do more of that, and it'll make me feel better. But it doesn't, and they end up feel more empty. And the thing that I hear from guys is, well, I want to do something different with my life, but I don't know what to do. What is life calling me towards? And it's the same answer to this as that little child who's working out what to do in life. So picture this in your head. I don't know whether I like Mexican food. We'll try some Mexican food. I don't know whether I like Indian food. We'll just try some Indian food and see if I like that. I don't know whether I like Vietnamese food. We'll try some Vietnamese food. So what happens when life calls you past this midlife point of life, and you don't know what you want to do and what that calling is, then you try different things. Some of your kids try different things and see what kind of it works and see what doesn't work, but try different things. And I think it's interesting, this reflection between the dad who's been living the life of their parents all the way through life and suddenly thinks, shit, I want to live my own life at midlife, and the conversation you're having with your child when they're children. It's almost an identical choice point and conversation that you're having. I
was waiting on you, Anthony.
Yep, just making sure that the house is in order. No, I love the conversation. I really do. I love the topic. This is something that it strikes a chord with me, talking about the shadow. Alice Miller describes it as the full self, or the true self, right? We want to encourage our kids to be the truest that they can be, authentic. And I think it's great what's going on here, right? Talking to Joe, the guys on Dad Twitter, this is really the first time I've seen like an active campaign to help fathers, right? Actively help fathers and have tough conversations and say, why is there such dysfunction going on in the world? And what could we do to make it better? And to go to your point with why midlife crisis, why they happen, or why men go through this, I believe this goes back to years ago when men started working long hours, not spending enough time in the home. Then now we have this whole fatherless home crisis going on. You have women going in the workforce. A lot of the attention is just taken away from the kids. So of course they're going to suffer. And I think if we can keep having these conversations and support fathers and say, hey, listen, man, we know your childhood was tough. We know life is tough. But what we're going to do is we're going to have fathers get together and we're going to figure this shit out. We're going to figure out what we can do to raise healthier kids, right? If that's peaceful parenting. What we need to do is we need to stop using violence against our kids. We need to parent with principles, right? No manipulation, no coercion, no bribes. Let's raise healthy kids. What does that look like? How do we do it, right? How do we raise kids who are confident and resilient and have good self-esteem? Kids who, when they're 2 years old, we're not smacking them because they're learning how to walk and explore the world. Or when they're 13 or become a teenager, we're not locking them down because we're afraid of what they might do. I think if we can handle that in better ways, you won't see these guys in midlife questioning, why do I have no meaning or purpose? They'll be surrounded by it, right? They'll have families, they'll have kids who are flourishing, they'll have friends, real connections that they can make. So, I love having you on, Joe. I think this is great.
And the thing is, as well, to your point about coercion, Anthony, is that often it's just a matter of pausing and just taking a moment to think, right, how am I going to deal with this? Like, I had this week. I'll relate this story to the story this week. My eldest had a parents' evening, so we spoke to all our teachers on the Zoom call, and afterwards, the day after, my wife said, "Oh, I was on my way home," and she said, "Can you get something for Isla because she's done so well at school?" And I'm like, "I don't want to do that." And she was like, "Well, why do you not want to do that?" And I was like, "Look, I love her no matter what she does. Okay, I don't need to give her a reward for doing well at school, because what that does is it plants a seed in her head that to get validation from us, she has to do well at school." So I said, I will get something because it's the weekend. I'll get some sweets or some candy or whatever, but I'm not going to tie it to her parents' evening. And I had a little sat down, I had a little chat with her, and I said, "Look, sweetie, you've done really, really well. You should be really proud of yourself, and you've tried really hard, and you can see the results of trying really hard and really focusing and stuff and that. But I'm not going to give love or withhold love based on how well she's doing at school." And I wouldn't know that unless I'd been doing the work on myself. So this is why working on yourself as a father is really, really important in this whole equation. And I think that I think that one thing that I'm also going to say is that society is struggling to work out why men are committing suicide in midlife. Society is trying to struggle with why men are having midlife crises, and why men are having postnatal depression. This is a very new thing that men are getting postnatal depression, and what I call it is the crossroads of masculinity, which is basically at midlife, there's a number of things happen. Number one is, if you've always planned in life to settle down and have kids, and live happily ever after, that thing happens by midlife. And then you've got this like no man's land afterwards, which is right. Okay, that's great. What happens now? So you've got, number one, you've got a no man's land. Number two, your testosterone drops after you have kids significantly, in addition to the normal testosterone drop that goes on throughout life. So your drive and your biochemistry changes after you have children. Number three, is very stressful having kids. So the relationship with your wife changes. You're not going to have this family setup that you had before, because you've got a little person or two little people to look after. Number four, you may all struggle from postnatal depression, which is increasingly being diagnosed in men. But what happens, there's a massive amount of study being done into it in the UK. But essentially what happens is, often the stress of the trauma of watching your wife in childbirth acts as something which resurfaces trauma that has gone on earlier in your life. Okay, so if you've had trauma early on in your life, the experience of watching your wife go through trauma during childbirth, it brings it all to a head. And I've interviewed women whose husbands have committed suicide shortly after childbirth, because it's brought all this shit to the surface they've been dealing with their whole life. So society's scratching its head thinking, why are guys struggling? Why are men committing suicide? But they're not joining all these dots together. They're like, oh, well, it's just probably because they've lost their job or whatever. But it's not. There's a whole, what I would call clusterfuck of stuff going on at midlife, and society has no answer for it. So people like me are trying to work out you know, why is this happening? People will like, Zach is trying to work out, why is this happening? I can see these, I can kind of see, and the same with Anthony, the thinking about, well, hang on a minute, I can see this stuff going on, but how does this stuff all link together? The reason it all links together is because all of this stuff comes within a decade. You know, most of all this stuff is split across our lives, you know, but there's a pinch point in between about 36 and 45 for most guys, where it's a tidal wave of shit we have to deal with. And guess what? We're not equipped to deal with it because we've never been equipped. And to Anthony's point on initiation, boys and men would have gone through a rite of passage centuries ago. We're not doing that. So what's happening is guys are having to do their own rite of passage, like a self-induced, inflicted rite of passage, which goes on when they become adults. So there's a whole, like, it's a real hot mess to try and unravel. But fortunately, we're getting wise to it, and we're thinking, well, you know, guys are discovering ancient traditions like Stoicism, and they're getting into the coping mechanisms for mental health that the ancients knew about. We're having to rediscover our tribes, rediscover brotherhood, rediscover learning about our own mental health and how to cope with our own mental health, because the majority of us have never been equipped to deal with that. It's like, oh, well, you're feeling down, go and have a beer. Oh, you know, it's just so freaking surface level. It just doesn't deal with the depths of a man's psychological existence. You know what I mean? So there's my rant on that.
This is Joe at 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning. Imagine this man well rested in the middle of the day. Oh man, Joe, if anybody is not following you on Twitter, it's at Guild of Dads. The link's below. And if you've not checked out his podcast, jump on it. The man, you're seeing it here. Joe, that is exactly what we were looking to hit right here. Because when we're talking about these men, they're watching this channel for that. They're like, I'm real. Something's up here. Something's going on. Something's not right. And what I have found to be really interesting, actually, we have a few things in the chat I'll get to in a second, but big shout out to Dad Twitter. What I have found really interesting is all these fathers making their way to social media, which is predominantly viewed by most people as that's a early adult teenager area. They're using social media. They're doing this. And here we are, fathers, men in our 30s, 40s, and beyond, connecting and swapping notes. And what keeps on happening is these men are going back to early manhood. They're skipping what's happening right now, and they're going all the way back. What were those men doing? They were working hard. They were connected. They had tribes. They had rites of passage. You brought up Stoicism. The philosophers were like, hey, maybe we should stop worrying about things we shouldn't worry about and focus on the things we can focus on. How is that? That's a grand scale of what we're talking with going through your adulthood and bringing things back to childhood. It's just a bigger version, but now we're doing it. I mean, we're having this conversation using technology to have this discussion right now with other men. I mean, we're thousands of miles apart. The men in the chat, hundreds of miles from us right now, making the time to come together to have this discussion. To Anthony's point, when we're talking about like, well, what can we do? You know, how is this movement going to come together? Dude, we're just seeing the beginning of it. The whole world is looking at like, oh, look at all these things that are wrong. And I'm looking over here. I mean, the three of us are in it. The men in this chat are in it. We're like, we're not going to accept that. We're not going to be distracted. We can control this. Let's control it and make it good. And then be the example to help other men who are struggling. You know, for you, the data points you have from the individuals you podcasted with are allowing you to make connections in your own head because you have access to brilliant minds that are the average Joe who's raising his family and the PhD who is the expert in their field. And you're like, all right, I can see his view. I can see their view. Now look at all these things I can do myself. For me, coming from the military side, it was the brotherhood, the camaraderie. So the dots I'm connecting are more on the fellowship side of the house. And I'm finding like, oh, a lot of men are missing that. But now when you bring those two together, here's the mental side of the house, the physical side of the house, merge those. Men are finding ways to not only survive, but thrive in this modern day of ours. And it's incredible to watch it play out because it's some treat this like it's just a death sentence. Modern men are going to fail. They're going to get fat, get weak, get destroyed, get pushed to the side. That's the path they're going to follow. And some do accept that. That is their path. But others are saying, I don't want that. I don't want that for me. I don't want that for my children. I'm not going to follow your rules. I'm going to do things differently. And that's what we're seeing. And it's incredible. I mean, just looking at the chat, we've got these guys. So Marcus says, it's all about how we demonstrate navigating challenges in our lives as dads. If they see us reacting negatively to everything, then everything is going to be scary as fuck. That's why we're constantly saying men don't react. We're going to properly respond to this. COVID comes down and it goes crazy. We're not going to let that crazy outside go inside our home. Just like you were intentional about dealing with your child after the school meeting. I'm not going to just do this because that's what we do. I'm going to think about it. I don't want my kid to think here's a treat, like a good dog for sitting down. No, I'm not going to reward you for that. My love for you is not based upon your performance in this academics. It's based upon you, on an individual. I'm your father. So you're taking it and being more intentional. Your children, I mean, just your entire family, dude, are going to be better off. And then they're going to improve because they had things you didn't have. You were talking about the coping mechanisms. I am 500 plus days sober now. If you get 5 plus 1 beyond that, I was 20 years binge drinking, trying to hide and trying to cope with the shit from my past. I had to turn around and face that, man. And it was just, you try to numb that for so long. And then you start asking yourself, well, why do I keep doing this? And I keep ending up in the same spot. That the definition of insanity, right? I realized it's like, dude, if I'm doing the same thing and it's not fixing the problem. I had to face the problem.
And this is where what I call facing down the man in the mirror occurs. You have to face. Comes a point in your life where you run out of energy to keep running away from the man in the mirror, and you have to face that man in the mirror down. And what the most tragic thing about manhood right now is that guys turn away from that mirror and they double down on doing the stuff that's got them to that point already, which just makes them feel even worse. And the reason for that is that we have been conditioned for life to be, I say this, living a meaningful life does not mean living an easy life, because living a meaningful life requires that you go on a journey into yourself. And if you are not prepared for that, and if you're not equipped to deal with the ups and downs and the ebbs and flows of life's emotions and strong emotions that are going to throw at you, and your expectation is that it's going to be easy, then you're not going to be inclined to saddle up for the journey. You're going to keep running away from that journey that's calling you to a certain direction. And one of the things that I noticed when I started to go to work on myself was that life had become more meaningful. But the reason it had become more meaningful is that I'd created a vision for myself, that I'd taken action on that vision, and the meaning part of it lived in that journey. So my kind of tagline for Guild of Dads is vision, action, and meaning. And if you want to break it down onto a meta level, it's the meaning equation, which is vision plus action equals meaning. Okay, guys have to be moving forward towards something. It doesn't matter if it's set in stone, and it doesn't matter if that vision changes over time. But you have to have something you're working towards. You have to be taking action on that, and that creates the meaning. Vision plus action equals meaning. And when you begin to dial this in across all aspects of your life, then life changes very, very quickly. And this can be as simple as doing big picture things like a new business or building a new house. That can be a really big picture thing. Or it can be as simple as waking up in the morning and saying, right, I'm going to go and spend time one-on-one with my daughter. That's the vision. Then you take action to make that happen. You get in the car, you go to the park, you have the experience, and from that experience, you draw meaning from it. So that can happen very small little things that you have opportunities to do in your day, but it can be big, big picture things. And when you do that, life changes a lot. Your awareness improves, because you, to your point, Zach, when you were saying about talking with your son, you're just more aware of what's going on. And a lot of this is just awareness. It's just down to, right, this is how I feel. This is how my emotions are in this particular moment in time. And this is how I can apply it to the situation I'm in. And I can apply it to my parenting,
There are probably some men who think they're too far gone. And I've seen some of the comments, the testimonials, the praise of the work that you've done. And dude, there's nobody too far gone. And I've literally seen it, some of the messages these guys send you, it's real, man. Like they tune in and they feel heard. And they're like, oh, I think somebody was saying it was your lifeline. And it's like, man, I call it throwing ropes, what we're doing right now. These guys are stuck in holes. And this podcast is a rope. It's a whatever the hell, metaphysical, electronic rope. They hear this, they're like, oh, I get it. Maybe I'm not so crazy. Maybe I can get out of this, and if it's drinking, hey, well, Zac got over it. Maybe I can do that. With you shared the story, both of us lost, a parent. There were probably some people who were in that boat and where we went right and we're like, all right, I'm not going to let this keep me down. Maybe they went left and they're like, I can't get over this. I didn't have what some other kids had with that dual wielding, nature of parenting, and it just stunted their development. But then they hear this and they're like, well, those guys could do it. Maybe I can, and a little off topic, but it does segue well. Poetic Sheepdog says, Joe, when we talk, I'm going to call him Reeves. When Reeves says, Joe, when we talk about childhood, does the dad or mom have a bigger influence?
That's a good question. In my experience, I lost my mum at 18, so I had her present there for the whole of my childhood. And I would say that they equally fulfill both. So if you look at parenting as a whole, you need both of them there. So I wouldn't say that my mum or dad had a bigger influence. They had a different influence. So my dad was the kind of main breadwinner. You would term him more as, I guess, say an alpha male. He was a typical dad that would kind of come in and his dinner would be cooked and he'd lay down in the recliner and say, when's my dinner ready? And he'd walk into the kitchen. Is there anything for me to do? And my mum would say, no, it's all right. You go and sit. So it was very traditional. But my mum was very different to my dad. She was like the yin to his yang. So he was kind of quite fiery, quite impulsive. Sometimes I see a lot of myself in him. Whereas my mum was she was like the lion tamer, if that makes any sense. So, and we talk about in Dad Twitter, we talk about this masculine and feminine dynamic. They had a very masculine and feminine dynamic. My mother was very feminine, and I saw that kind of growing up. But in terms of my influence, my mum was very different to my dad. My mum was very much more, you can be anything you want to be, and she was a lot more softer, a lot more supportive, probably a lot more of a gentle parent than my dad was. My dad was a lot harder, but it worked. It was kind of like good cop, bad cop, if that makes any sense. But having said that, when I was growing up, I would get teased by my dad and I'd get teased by my older brother, and my mum would kind of stick up for me. So I would say they both had a significant influence. But what happens when you lose one parent is that your other parent is never the same. They're to use the word shadow, they're a shadow of them for their former self, because there's something missing from them. There's something missing from the dynamic. And that was kind of my experience. And I struggled. My dad wallowed in his own self-pity to a large degree when my mum died. I don't blame him for that, because again, coming back to what we know as the adults, as dads ourselves, you do what you think's best at the time and with the skills that you've got. So he obviously felt that was best for him at the time, but that impacted me as a young man in my late teens and early 20s, because when I needed him there for me, he wasn't there for me because he was running away and trying to escape from it. And he was dealing with his own shit and his own pain through my mum dying tragically. So, so through that experience is how a lot of my coping mechanisms took root, if you like. And being a 42-year-old man, I can look back on that now and I can say, well, shit, I didn't have a handbook for getting a call at my first job from my dad to say mum's been in a fatal road accident. I wasn't equipped to be bundled into the back of a police car and rushed at high speed to the hospital where my mum had been airlifted. I wasn't equipped to go into the place of rest after she passed away and sort of kind of look at this person laying there that was what used to be my mum, but she's still my mum, but she's not alive anymore. And then I wasn't equipped to deal with the after part of it, seeing my dad change, seeing everything I knew fucking fall apart. I thought that my mum and dad would be together, into their 80s, and we were all going to live happily after. And all of a sudden, this fairy tale that I'd been growing up with just was smashed to fucking pieces within like hours. But you don't get a handbook for that. You have to make the best of it, and you have to cope with it and deal with it as best as you can at the time. And but which is why I feel, to your point about the messages that I get, Zach, I think the hardest thing for any guy is to see another guy in pain. Next to his family, I think seeing another guy in pain and seeing another guy in desperation is a hard thing to see. And I know what pain is, I know what it is to feel really, really bad and to have real bad shit happening and going down. So when I get messages from guys, I do feel a deep yearning within me to try and help, or to try and do something, or give them something that is going to give them hope that there's going to be brighter days ahead and that they can get through it. And that if I can pass on what I learned from the podcast and what I learned from my own life onto them, that can help them. I won't say succeed. I think the word is survive. I think survive life, and survive life in all the difficulties that it throws at you. So, yeah, again another rant. I'm on a rant session tonight. I don't know why.
You're in the
It's
right
okay,
place,
bro.
man. What we do.
Brought you on. Yeah, I will add that I think it's interesting. We find ourselves in these spots where we're trying to help men. And, what you said before, you have these men that are lost and they don't know how to get help. They don't feel good about themselves, right? They're not confident. And what I've found with implementing peaceful parenting, talking to dads about becoming better parents, is once we afford that right or that virtue or that love to our kids, right? Once we start letting them feel comfortable in their own skin, letting them feel proud of who they are, then we can start to learn it ourselves as a dad, right? The healing process takes place when we can give something that we're void of. We can give that to our kids, and we can see them flourish and them enjoy it. Then we know it's good, right? Because our whole life we've been afraid of it, because our childhood was shut up. You're stupid. Don't say that. Go in your room. We were conditioned to be isolated, because that isolation is what controlled us from our parents. So what I've experienced, and I know a lot of guys that I've worked with, once you start giving your kids that love, that connection, you can allow yourself to have it, right? It's like a self-healing process. So that would be, one of my recommendations is, if you're a father and you have kids, man, love the shit out of them. Try to keep working on your parenting. Don't make excuses, right? We say do hard things. Learn how to be a better dad. There's nothing really more difficult than that. Healthy kids are hard to raise. So, dive into that. And that's why we're doing what we're doing, Joe.
I think kids are the medicine for your pain.
It's interesting, the love that comes from a kid, the inspiration that comes from a kid. There are many men who've shared exactly that. I didn't have purpose till I saw my child, and that's what fueled them to get sober, to start working out, to start taking their life seriously, to get off their ass off the couch and go do something. Is they saw those little eyes looking up at them. And Joe, people will listen to your story and say, how did you just sit there and share that? I mean, again, you're running on hours of sleep. And you just sat and you shared that entire story. And it's, you can laugh, but I mean, you're able to bring all that together and you're able to own the story. And I think that's the greatest strength of what you're doing here. You own your story. This happened. This is a part of your story, but it doesn't own you. It could be an anchor. You've chosen to make it fuel. It doesn't make it hurt less. It doesn't make it easier. It just allows you to use the thing instead of be used by the thing, and that's a choice you made. And I don't want that to be lost in anybody. And I get it. I connect with a shit ton of what you just said because I fucking lived it, man. And I see that. I'm like, yeah, no, I get it. Like, And I think a lot of men who've had to overcome and, again, make that choice. Is this fuel or is this an anchor? They'll see it and hopefully they'll start to see, well, this happened and I can't change that, but I can change how I respond to it. And we were having a discussion with the dad Twitter guys, and one of them was like, well, I made a bunch of mistakes. And I'm like, dude, that's the greatest thing you could share right now, man. Because there's a lot of guys making mistakes, but you're owning them and you're improving. Share that. How did you reach that point? People don't want a perfect story because they can't relate to it. Real life is flawed. Real life is hard. Like you said, to live a meaningful life, you have to get rid of the comfortable life. It's not going to be easy, but that's the point of it.
There's a really good book that I read recently. Because it's called The Choice by a lady called Edith Eger, who's a Hungarian. She was a Hungarian Jew, and she was pulled from a heap of bodies at the end of World War II. And in her book, she makes a really interesting point, which I could really resonated with me. She says, and her book is called The Choice. She says, I was victimized. She says, I was victimized in the most horrendous, horrific way. And my family were taken away from me in the most horrendous, horrific way. But I had a choice as to whether to be a victim of my own life, whether I was going to revel in victimhood. And this was a lady who'd survived the Holocaust, the same as Viktor Frankl did. And she made that choice. And that point in the book really resonated with me, because deep down, I believe we all have a choice as to whether we want to become a victim in life and revel in our own self-pity, or whether we want to make that choice to say, actually, no, I'm not going to be a victim of my own life. I'm not going to do that. And what saddens me deeply at the minute, on a deeply human level, is that there are many people who are attaching meaning to victimhood, and they're they are reveling in victimhood. Victimhood is becoming a badge of honor, unfortunately. And I've spoken to people who have been abused as children before. Okay, these are really difficult conversations, very, very difficult conversations, and I have them in my Facebook group. Individuals that have been abused and who have suffered extreme trauma. Okay, and these people don't want to become to be victims of their own life. They want to move beyond it, and they don't want to revel in their own self-pity. So the idea that someone that's been through comparatively nothing would want to be a victim out of choice, when there are people who are genuinely victims who don't want to be a victim out of choice, it makes me angry, but it boggles my mind, because it's just BS of the first degree, and there'll be you've served in the military, Zac, so you know about this. There are families in Iraq and Syria and the Middle East and other war zones who have had their whole families wiped out in a mortar bomb attack. Okay, how do you come back from that? I think about this now and again. How would you come back from having your whole family wiped out in seconds? Gone, everything gone. And there's people that are going, oh yeah, I'm such a victim because people didn't, and I'm going to go on a bit of a rant here, but people didn't refer to me as the correct pronoun. I'm a victim.
I saw it coming.
God's sake, man, just really get some perspective on shit. You know what I mean? You are getting my best rants tonight, by the way.
No attention in childhood, right? Any way you can get attention. If you have to be a victim to attain attention from anybody, that's what people are doing now. I did have a question for you, though, relating to something you said earlier about if your parents make mistakes, right? We don't want to dwell on it.
Every time, man. That means everything's working in the universe. As long as something makes noise in his house, it means things are good.
I'm in a back alley, so there's a lot of stuff.
I thought you were in the nightclub chill out. You look like you're in a nightclub chill out room, Anthony.
I shut the neon lights off. No, and because you brought up initiation, and you brought up parents that made mistakes and how we shouldn't dwell on them, right? We should see the good in what our parents do, and we should learn from the mistakes. And I hear this often, right? Like, kids aren't initiated, young men aren't initiated anymore. There's no rites of passage, which I agree with. It's gone. But I think if you look back in history, and the reason why the rites of passage or initiation, why this has failed, right? Why we no longer do it. There's a lot of reasons, but I think one of the main reasons is because kids were brutalized during the rites of passage. They were tortured. They were treated inhumane, and this treatment causes trauma. And you're not going to have adults who are going to grow up and be healthy and functioning. And I think it takes a number of generations for this to take shape. As fathers, and what we do, and using what you said with learning from your parents, I think we need to learn from the past, and we need to understand, young boys, they do need their fathers. Like I said before, with fatherless homes, and how could we make this better? I think Reeves asked the question, who's more important? I think as fathers, we need to be involved at a young age as much as we can, right? Don't wait for your boy to be 14 or 15 and then go take him hunting. Be involved the moment he's born, and be loving, be affectionate, be soft, right? Be kind. And then when he becomes a man, then you take him through that process. And I guarantee you'll see a lot of the pain that men face in these days now be, slowly eliminated.
Yeah.
So that was my question. Do you agree with me or not?
Yeah, I do agree with you. And interestingly, and again, I'm gonna refer this back to, there's a lady I interviewed called Dr. Anna Machin, who's an evolutionary biologist who's written a book, fantastic book. I think it's called Life of Dad. So I would very much recommend that book. But she makes the point in her book that fathers come to the fore when kids get to secondary school age over here. So that's what, 11, 12 years old. That is when the kind of mentorship, the guiding, the tutoring, the experience, the wisdom, all of these really strong male masculine virtues come to the fore when kids reach around about 11, 12 years old. Okay. And it's interesting because I find that in terms of my oldest daughter is that age now, I find that sometimes I am doing a more, I won't say better, but more effective job than my wife at the moment. Now, that's not to say my wife's doing a bad job, but sometimes she'll clash with my daughter. She'll like really kind of, because, and particularly at certain times of the month, she'll clash with my daughter. Whereas like I am finding that taking the backing off route and actually, like I can tell from my daughter if there's something troubling her. So I don't talk to her about it at the dinner table in front of everyone. I'll knock on her bedroom door a little bit later, sit on her bed. How's your day been? What happened? And I don't force her to tell me. She will eventually tell me, or we'll go for a walk, So you're connecting with them at the same time as you're doing this mentorship and guiding, and because then she may well open up and she'll say to me, okay, well, this happened at school, and I can say, well, how did that make you feel? I'm not being a psychologist, but I'm getting to the root of, how do you feel? Well, I feel angry. Okay, so what's, so how do you deal with feeling anger? Well, sometimes I remove myself from the situation, Dad, or I'll go and read a book, or what. So you begin to build a picture of how she's dealing with her emotions and stuff, and you can see whether or not it's, not saying whether it's good or bad, but whether or not you can help her through that process of processing those emotions out, and that kind of self-regulation and that emotional awareness. Kids something called executive function comes into play as well at that age, which is basically their ability to, kids of that age, 11 to 13, they're a bit clumsy, a bit disorganized, and this is down to executive function. It's part of the brain that's not fully developed yet. So they can get frustrated, they can get quite angry, they can get annoyed with themselves. So at that point, you need to be aware that you need to be able to guide them through this process of not having a full toolbox in their brain that a kid of say 15 or 16 would. So it's just been, again, it comes back to awareness, being awareness of, I find it fascinating learning about, biology and evolutionary biology. So I enjoy studying this stuff and applying it. And again, this isn't a case of getting it right all the time and thinking, I'm going to be the perfect parent and I'm going to get this right all the time. There are probably going to be times when you're going to kind of yell at them, because again, what you're doing is you're You're trying to reverse all of what you've learned and what's been role modeled to you as a kid when you were growing up. So yeah, but I do agree with you that there is a place to be a lot more compassionate and empathetic about around this side of things. So
Yeah,
You know,
and
it's interesting when you look at how, as a man, when you're focused on a mission and you're going forward, there's a certain sense of like, this is what's right, and you know what's right. You got to commit to it. So you're like, we're gonna work out, we're gonna spend time together, we're gonna do these things. And I realized, you know, we've been grinding like pretty hard since we moved here. So it's been weeks of just go, 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 go. And the other day, I was like, guys, we're not doing anything. You know, I put the phone down. Everything went off. I was like, we're gonna sit and literally do nothing. And we had such a great time just talking. We were just we were hanging out on the couches. You know, one's in the chair, and my wife and I are hanging out on the couch. My daughter's on the couch. The dogs are around. Nothing productive was there, which goes against everything inside of me. Everything in my brain is saying, go write something, go record something, go do something with the kids. And I was like, we really have to pull back. These kids, they're not these on a mission. They're not my little soldiers. This is my family. And we can't let work enter the home to where now we're always working together on something. Sometimes it's just sitting and listening and enjoying the company. You know, and I had such a great evening. And again, it's very uncomfortable for me to do nothing. I like being productive. I enjoy putting these hands to use. But I had such a great time connecting. And when you were talking about the mental toolbox, I was like, man, the kids too, they don't always need to be going. They could just sit and relax and have a good time. And they need that. And, you know, to Anthony's point on rites of passage back in the day, you know, sons and father, or let's say children and their father, they were together much more often with nothing going on to distract them. You know, pre-industrial revolution parenthood, the dad was there. He was on the farm doing the land. You know, maybe he was a warrior, disappeared for whatever. But when he came back, he just took care of the home. And the sun went down. He went inside, and they were together, and they spent time doing nothing together. And I just thought that was such a wonderful thing to do. And we're going to be making it more of a, not like putting the schedule nothing days, but I'm going to be more intentional about making sure I'm recognizing like, hey, we don't always have to be going level 10, redlining it.
Yeah, and I think the other thing as well, which is interesting, what you just said, is that so I've sort of looked into how men and women kind of interact together as well, and again, this comes from evolutionary biology. You know, as hunter gatherers and going out hunting, it would generally be side by side. So if you've got to think about how guys connect with each other, they're often doing stuff side by side. They'll be going for a run, going for a walk, going fishing, playing golf. These are sides, so they interact, not always talking face to face, whereas women talk kind of face to face. So it's very natural for a father and a son, or a father and a daughter, to be doing an activity where they're side by side. The connection comes through doing activities together, climbing trees, playing football, you know. So it's a different kind of interaction that men thrive in compared to girls. And one of the things that's kind of is a kind of bone of contention within the psychological community at the minute is, you know, this whole notion of, you know, men need to be more like women. Well, actually, men are very different to women. The way they interact is very different to women, you know, and so it's not a one size fits all approach in terms of communication and interaction. Sorry, I've noticed there's another question coming up actually.
Yeah. So from PD, he says, how do you measure success for your kids? To put it another way, how do you know you're raising them right? That's a great question. I'm going to leave that one to Joe. You can kick that off.
That is a really good. Well, when we're young men, we very much measure success in terms of the haves, you know. And it's interesting that you've got I don't know whether it's an RS5 or an S5 Audi there, but anyway, that's by the by. But we measure success based on, and I think that we've grown up from our parents' generation and that kind of the baby boomer generation afterwards. It's very much what car you've got, what house you've got, where you go on holiday. You know, it's very much been attached to financial stuff. And I had an interaction with someone on Twitter today, funnily enough, over this, and he was like, "Yeah, well, it's a dads need to provide and they need to do this and whatever and stuff." And I was like, "No, it's not. That's part of the equation. That's base level parenting. Actually, you need to provide emotionally, mentally, and all these different things. So how do you measure success for your kids? I measure success for my daughter in terms of how happy she is. It's a very simple barometer. I don't measure success in terms of her grades. I don't measure it in terms of how well she's doing at school, about how well she's behaved. One thing I said, I think in a tweet with Zac today was, you can't expect to raise kids that have their own minds, but also do as they're told. You just can't have those two things, because if you want a kid that's kind of can think for themselves, has their own mind, can make up their own decisions, form their own belief systems, you can't do that if you're forcing them what to think and you're forcing them what to do. So I measure my kids' success in their happiness, and I'll tell you the reason why. Okay, my eldest daughter is autistic. She's on the autistic spectrum, and when she was younger, all we wanted for her was to get through a day of school and be happy. And we had battles and battles and battles with the system to get her the help she kind of needed at the time. Again, at that time, there was other parents that were like, I want my kid to be this. And they were like, my kid's not getting the grades, so we want them to have extra maths tuition. All we wanted was for our daughter to be happy at school. So my measure has always been, for the kids' success, is how happy they are. And that follows very nice onto this next bit. Put another way, how do you know you're raising them right? Self-explanatory. I know I'm raising them right if they're happy, content, balanced, level-headed kids that are growing, developing, learning from their mistakes, and I'm not kind of smashing them over the head with a stick to tell them how they should be and how I would like them to be. Because essentially what I'm doing is, they're like like on Karate Kid, Mr. Miyagi's little trees. He's kind of helping them, tending to them, looking after them, and giving them the water and putting them in the sunlight so they grow. He's not like, he's not kind of he's not forcing them, but he's allowing them to grow in their own kind of different way. Okay, you could say that he's kind of clipping them and stunting their growth so they don't grow into big trees, but he's allowing them to develop their own shape and their own kind of personality with his help and attention and TLC. But he's not putting them in a mold, a certain way that they've got to be. Mr. Miyagi's little trees. But yeah, I don't measure my kids in terms of grades. I just don't. I see so many parents do it, and it's exactly what we were talking about at the beginning of this conversation. So I just don't do it.
What about you, Anthony?
I love when really smart people answer the question before me. That's where I can just sit here and look pretty. I would agree with a lot of what Joe said. Right, happiness is a key indicator. I see a lot of men who are not happy, right, and it shows. It took me a long time to find happiness and to continue to want to work on it and enjoy my life, not just always go go go. I would say with my kids, success, know that I raised them right, is the character that I see them become. Right, how they go out into the world and how they behave. How they treat other people, how they treat themselves, right? To me, that is success. If I raise kids and they're taking care of their physical health, their mental health, their emotional health, I know, one, that I've succeeded as an adult, right, as their parent, because I've set the path forward for them. And then when I see them go out in the world and they're capable and they're able to be strong enough to help other people, right? That now I know they're taking care of themselves, where they're not codependent and they're always worried about everybody else and they're not taking care of themselves. So when I see those things, to me, that's a key marker that I've raised them right, that they're on the right path, and that I don't have to worry so much as a dad.
You guys hit the nail on the head, so I don't have to answer it.
Yeah, no, we're going to make you answer it.
It's the same as you. I mean, it's not much different. You know, there's a theme going here. You know, you're measuring the success of the kid off of what they're doing in their life and what they want to do. You know, like you see them, they're happy doing their thing. You know, and I've shared, and very similar to Joe, like I don't care about school. I'm the worst person to talk to. I was a horrible student to begin with, so I didn't even like school. But my kids, you know, they're doing well in school, and it's because there's not pressure on them to perform. Hey, go study, learn. Do we use YouTube all the time to learn things? If homework's taking too long, I'm like, here are the answers. Let's do this. Here's how that works. We'll come back to it later on. There's no point in you to sit there for 2 hours frustrated at the table. What is that teaching you? It's teaching you that you can work for free for your job later on in life as an adult and bring that home and don't see your family. Hell no. We're going to crush that early on here at elementary school. It's not happening. You know, to Anthony's point, when I see my kids staying extra to help kids, or stay behind to help other kids do things, you know, you see these little moments, and I can't think of a specific one, you know, at this moment, but there are multiple times, you know, I've shared it online and sometimes I've kept it private to myself, but you see that little glimpse of, you're like, all right, like that was a really good thing you just did. Or you're like, I'm really like, that was cool for you to come up with that on your own, to go and do the thing and to help that person out. It's about being a good person. It's about being a happy and content individual with your life. And I don't want to hear, I mean, we recently did a video on Zach Stacy, NFL football player who was beating his wife in front of their baby. He had looks, he had riches, he had fame, he had everything that people think would make you successful, but he wasn't happy. And he's in jail now. He ended up losing his mind. My kids and their success will not be measured off of their grades, their performance in sports, or any of these exterior things. In their soul and in their mind, are they content with who they are and where they're going? And do they know that their parents love them and will support wherever they go? You know, and I once had someone reach out. Well, that's easy for you to say, you know, your kids, they're doing well. I was like, you don't understand. You know, my kid, he was doing well in baseball. If he wanted to quit baseball today and go to build rockets, or he wanted to travel somewhere and help kids in, you know, New Guinea, we would fucking do that. Like, that's not even a fucking joke, man. I don't care about what sport he plays. My daughter, she's great at cheerleading and gymnastics. If she wanted to quit that and become an author or go on the debate team, dude, we'd be writing books together and I'd be teaching her how to argue. I don't care what they do. It's their life. And I will support wherever they want to go. And when they have that contentment, they find their way to their passion. And you see a lot of kids who, you know, like with the cycling you brought up earlier, you know, they might have loved it at one point, but then all of a sudden dad ruined it. And now they hate the sport because all that pressure that went on them, they lost their passion for it. Mm-hmm. So as father, my job, like the little trees, I can kind of keep the buoys to keep them safe, you know. That's gonna be like a whole thing. Miyagi's little trees.
They're called bonsai trees, first of all. Let's just throw that trees out
there. You know, I can help guide them, you know, but it's not my job to do all the work for it. They've got to grow on their own, and I just kind of help where they're going and do their little thing, keep them safe. So
yeah, Joe said that already.
I didn't have to go, man. I could have just said ditto.
I was going to say
hashtag Miyagi's.
Do you know how difficult it is to follow up the guy who drops a Karate Kid, Mr. Miyagi bonsai tree reference?
You're never coming back, Joe.
I'm just sad.
One and done. You're making us look bad.
I'm just sad because I was watching Cobra Kai. Just digressing slightly, I was watching Cobra Kai, and there was Bananarama. So there's a bit in Cobra Kai where he's on his BMX, where they're all going into the high school, and Bananarama Cruel Summer is playing, right? And then I watched the original Karate Kid film a few weeks later, and in actual fact, and this is such a nerd thing, I noticed that in the original film, as Daniel LaRusso is going into the high school on his BMX, they've got Cruel Summer by Bananarama playing, and I'm like, God, that's so cool that the producers thought to do that at the same point in Cobra Kai as they did in the original Karate Kid film. But yeah, anyway, that's just a geek out nerd moment there.
Attention to detail. These things matter.
They do matter. And I do like it. It's a quintessential 80s song.
Well, it's 2021. I don't think men are supposed to watch movies anymore. It's not masculine.
You know what my view on that is.
All right, Joe, we've kept you up for a while. Before we wrap this up, people looking to find more of your content, and any closing words?
Yeah, if you want to find out about me, I'm on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. There's a Facebook Guild of Dads Facebook group as well, which is free to join. There's no cost for that. If anything's resonated with you on what we've spoke about this evening, or if you want any information on any of what I've mentioned, just drop me a DM on any of those channels. I'm quite easy to find. What am I going to leave you guys with tonight? I think the thing that I'm probably going to leave with you tonight in terms of this whole discussion essentially is around mental health, and it's around our relationship with thought, feeling, and emotion. And the two things that I say to all guys without exception is this: change your relationship with thought, feeling, and emotion. So start to find out about why you behave the way you do, and what prompts you to behave the way you do, and change how you interact with the thoughts, feelings, and emotions that go in through your head. Because when you begin to do that, what it does is it releases a lot of pain, baggage, and frustration from you. And the best book that I found for this is Michael A. Singer's Untethered Soul. It completely blows away, what your brain is, and and the little thought machine that goes on in your head that's churning out thoughts, feelings, and emotions, on a daily basis. So the first thing is change your relationship with thought, feeling, and emotion. The second thing is to become a lifelong student of the mind. And what I'm not saying that you have to read a book every single week in psychology, okay? But what I am saying is to educate yourself on how you behave as a human being and how you interact with other people, and the research and the knowledge that we're getting in this field is changing on a yearly basis. They're finding out more and more stuff about how we interact and behave towards one another, and those two things, changing your relationship with thought, feeling, and emotion, and becoming a lifelong student of the mind, is going to fundamentally change how you interact with yourself first and foremost, but secondly, how you interact with everyone around you. So those are the two things that I'd leave you guys with tonight. And obviously, live a life of vision, action, and meaning.
Love it.
Anthony, what do you got?
I want to thank Joe for coming on, man. It was awesome to meet you, see you face to face. We've spoken a lot on Twitter. Great to hear your perspective, man. You far surpassed my expectations. Conversation was excellent. And, I love hearing another father speak about the benefits of improving yourself and becoming a better parent, and how that reflects on your kids. Just learning how to respond instead of react. Be a man who's confident, who can lead his family, and who's always looking to do the right thing. Right? Be good leadership in the home is needed in this day and age. And we're going to continue to have these conversations. I look forward to getting all the dad Twitter on here, and we can just keep knocking them down and helping dads and improving families one by one.
And that's what it's about, man. I mean, honestly, you see it's growing. It's growing before our eyes. It's happening. Rarely do you know you're in it while it's happening. Normally you look back like, oh, those are the good old days. But like, we're in it and we know it, and we're watching it happen and we're watching it grow. But Joe, you've been doing this for years, man. And I've listened to hours of your content. Before you and I ever met, I was just like, oh, cool. Here's another dad doing this thing, and I was running the Family Alpha podcast. And I never in my wildest dreams thought I'd be running a fatherhood focused thing with two other fathers. One of them I've been listening to years. Another one I've learned so much from so quickly. So it's just incredible to see where this thing's going. And from our discussions, behind the scenes to even now, the authentic, and I was going to send you a private message, I'm just going to throw it publicly. The authentic message you just dropped in these guys. You let them inside, you let them see what was going on, and you just shared it and owned it. And the way you deliver this content, this is what men need to see. This is what men need to know. Their voice matters. They have to find that, though, and let that out. And when they, just like you were saying, we're starting with the mind. If you don't start within, you don't know your shape. You don't know who you are and how you fit into the world. And if you don't know how you fit like a puzzle piece, you can't go into the picture with everybody else. And you see these other dads and they're connecting and jiving because we all know where we click together, because we know who we are, what we're bringing to the table, where we're weak, where we need help. You know, some things we're pushing out with our strength. Sometimes it's like an inlet to our piece. I need you to help me. So hey, I need information from you. I need examples from you. I need guidance. You know, your mentorship is helping me get better. And dude, on a public platform, I greatly appreciate that. And I know what time it is for you. So you're doing this, you know, in the middle of the night, but that goes to show. And I keep reiterating that for people to see. Some people can't take 5 minutes to wake up early to spend time with their kids. And you woke up in the middle of your night to spend 2 hours with us. That's dedication, man. That's intentional behavior. And, you know, you treat all of your stuff like, you know, a father. You're treating everything you do. And here you're like, hey, I will give these guys my time. Just like you for your kids, I would give them my time. So thank you, Joe. And I fucking mean that.
I appreciate it. And anytime you want me to come and talk to you, I'm happy to do so. You know,
see you tomorrow.
I enjoy doing it. I enjoy doing it. Maybe not tomorrow.
It's something going on in the UK, man. We had Alec just jump on, no problem.
These dudes don't sleep.
I'll do it. Yeah, they don't. You want to talk about fatherhood? I'll be there anytime.
Yeah, we're robots.
All right, Joe, thank you for your time. For everybody that tuned in, make sure you like and subscribe. We will have links to all of Joe's content below. Get on there. Definitely dive into those podcasts. You will have plenty of content to dig through, and it'll open your mind and open some doors in your mind. You might not even know we're there. Anthony, Joe, thank you very much. For everybody that tuned in, this has been another episode on Oak and Rock Father.